There's no stopping Jim Brown on an effort like this. He goes over the top and into the end zone for his 5th touchdown of the day.
Jim Brown was a titan, which means he was larger than man.
He was bigger and faster and stronger than everybody on the field.
Considered by most experts as the greatest fullback ever to play the game, Jimmy's harder to bring down than a wild steer.
Jim Brown. Was the era argument really fair? December 21st, 1958. Yankee Stadium. One game. Winner goes to the NFL championship. Loser goes home. And the New York Giants have built their entire afternoon around one decision. Stop the man in brown and orange, and nothing else matters. Watch him disappear. 7 carries, 8 yards. A career low by a mile for the most feared runner alive. Linebacker Sam Huff and lineman Dick Modzalewski hit him so hard on one play that Huff was certain they'd knocked him out cold. Brown got up. He always got up. The final whistle blows. Giants 10, Browns nothing. And the man every defense in football has failed to solve for 2 straight years just got buried in the snow on the only stage that actually counted. Hold that image, because that's not a footnote in Jim Brown's story. That's the crack in the myth this entire video is about to tear wide open. He's called the most dominant running back who ever lived. But football may have spent 60 years confusing dominance with timing. Smaller defenders, fewer teams, tackling that looks prehistoric on film. That's the case modern fans throw at him. Jim Brown. Was the era argument really fair? Forget could he do it today. That question's tired. Here's the one that matters. Did Jim Brown dominate the biggest games of his own era as completely as history remembers? Or is there a hole in the legend nobody wants to look at? That 8-yard afternoon in the snow wasn't bad luck. It was a warning. Let's open the file. The league he played in. James Nathaniel Brown was born February 17, 1936, in St. Simons, Georgia, and raised in Manhasset, New York. At Syracuse, he was arguably the greatest all-around athlete the school has ever produced. All-America in football and lacrosse both. Cleveland made him the 6th overall pick in the 1957 draft, and nothing about the league he stepped into was built to handle what he was about to do to it. Defensive fronts were simple. Weight rooms barely existed. Medical care for a black superstar in 1957 America was a colder, harder conversation than it is now. And the color line in pro football had only been broken a little over a decade before Brown ever put on a helmet. Modern fans look at that grainy black and white film and see smaller, slower men trying to tackle him. They're not wrong. That's real. It deserves airtime, not mockery. Here's what that film doesn't say out loud. Brown was one of a small handful of black superstars in a league that had only reintegrated a decade earlier, carrying the ball in stadiums that were, week after week, overwhelmingly white, coached, refereed, and covered almost entirely by white men.
I came up in the 50s. Race was always an issue everywhere. And I was the only African-American on the team. It was very difficult based upon the racial attitude of some people.
And defenses used every tool the era allowed, and plenty it didn't. Late hits, clotheslines, cheap shots thrown well after the whistle. The kind that draw an instant flag and a fine in today's NFL and drew nothing at all in his. Brown never said a word about it to the press, not once. In 9 years. And after every single hit, legal or not, clean or not, he picked himself up off the ground the exact same way, slowly, deliberately. No wince, no limp he didn't choose to show, no reaction the sideline or the crowd could read.
After a play, when you'd been tackled, you were always very slow to get up. Consistent though. Why?
Well, you get up the same time each time so that your enemy don't know when you're hurt or when you have to get up slow. And it gives you an advantage. That's simple.
His own explanation was simple: act hurt after every tackle, and the defense would never know when he was really hurt, so there was no data to give them. Just a man in brown and orange getting up on his own schedule every single time and walking calmly back to the huddle like nothing had happened at all. That wasn't just toughness. In that stadium, in that decade, it was a statement made without ever saying a word. But the era argument, the excuse people reach for to shrink him, might be the weakest attack in his entire case. The real attack already happened, in the snow at Yankee Stadium, and it's coming back for him. The impossible separation. That same refusal to let anyone see him hurt is the same discipline that never let his body break down. 6'2", 232 pounds, sprinter's speed stapled onto a fullback's frame, a body the 1950s had no blueprint for. He didn't compete in that league. He annihilated it, year after year, like clockwork nobody could jam. 8 rushing titles in 9 seasons, 5 straight to open his career, a record still standing. 9 Pro Bowls every single year he played. 8 first-team All-NFL nods, 3 MVPs. Never missed one game across 118 career contests. 12,312 rushing yards, a record that stood for nearly 20 years until Walter Payton finally broke it in 1984.
High formation, quick pitch to Walter, looking for the record, cuts back, he's got it, he's out over the 25 to the 26-yard line. Walter Payton becomes the National Football League all-time.
And here's the number that still shouldn't be possible: 104.3 rushing yards every single game for his entire career. Nobody else in NFL history has ever cleared 100 a game for a career. Not Sanders, not Emmitt Smith, not Peyton, just him. So ask yourself the question the era argument can't answer. If the competition really was this soft, why did it only break like this for one man? Cleveland's roster turned over. The league's talent pool changed. Defenses spent 9 straight years building game plans specifically to stop him, and he kept winning rushing titles anyway. The era produced thousands of players. It only produced one Jim Brown. That's the myth at full strength. Now go back to the snow. The postseason bomb. That 8-yard afternoon against the Giants wasn't a fluke. It's the first data point in a pattern the highlight reels never show you. Cleveland reached the postseason 4 times with Brown in the backfield. 1957, that 1958 tiebreaker, 1964, 1965. Add up every carry from all 4 games, and here's what's left. 66 attempts, 241 yards, 1 touchdown, 3.7 yards a carry. 60 yards a game, against a career regular season average of 104.3 yards a game at 5.2 a carry. Say that out loud. The runner remembered as inevitable, the man nobody could bring down for 9 straight years, reached the postseason 4 times and crossed the goal line on the ground exactly once. Did Jim Brown dominate football? Or did he only dominate the part of football where losing didn't end the season? Sit with that, because it's about to get worse for him before it gets better. Was Braun exposed? Here's the prosecution's full case, and none of it is cheap. His dominance didn't just dip in the postseason. It collapsed right when the stakes were highest and the whole season was on the line. His sample size is damning precisely because it's so small. 3 championship games in 9 years. 1 win. For a man repeatedly called the greatest who ever played this position, that's an almost impossibly thin foundation to build a ring count on. And here's where it gets personal. Other legends didn't just survive the postseason. Some of them got bigger in it. Picture Terrell Davis in the locker room at halftime of Super Bowl 32, doubled over from a migraine so severe he could barely see the scoreboard, and coming back out anyway to rush for 157 yards and 3 touchdowns on his way to game MVP. That wasn't a one-time miracle. Across 8 career playoff games, Davis averaged 143 rushing yards, more than his regular season career pace. Franco Harris averaged 82 yards a game across 19 playoff games, better than his regular season number on his way to 4 rings. Emmitt Smith did the same, 93 yards a game in the playoffs, higher than his career average, still the NFL's all-time postseason rushing leader. 3 men who stepped onto the biggest stage of their careers and got more dangerous, not less. Jim Brown's reputation asks history to treat 4 games, averaging barely over half his career pace, as almost irrelevant to the final verdict. That's not a cheap shot. That's the strongest, most sourced ammunition Brown skeptics will ever get. But it's not the whole story, not even close. Now the defense rises, and this is where everything you just heard gets turned inside out. The 27-0 reversal. December 27th, 1964, Cleveland Stadium. Snow again. Always snow with this man. 79,544 fans, silent at halftime, deafening by the fourth quarter. 4 games isn't enough to erase 9 years of devastation, and here's the honest reason why. Brown's NFL had no wild card weekend, no expanded bracket, no path to stack 3 or 4 playoff games in a single season. A team made the championship, or its season ended in December with no more film left to shoot. Judge a man on 4 snapshots, and you're not just judging the man, you're judging the entire structure he was trapped inside. And then there's the one afternoon that changes everything. The Baltimore Colts walk into Cleveland as 7-point favorites, 12-2 on the year. Johnny Unitas at quarterback, one of the best defenses in professional football, allowing the fewest points in the league all season. Snow is coming down sideways. The first half ends scoreless. Nerves, fumbles, 2 proud teams refusing to blink. Then the Browns walk out of that locker room and something breaks open. Groza hits a field goal from the 43. 2 drives later, Frank Ryan finds Gary Collins in the end zone, 10-0. Then again, minutes later, 17-0, all in the third quarter alone. Groza adds a second field goal early in the fourth to make it 20. And then Ryan and Collins connect one final time, a 51-yarder, and it's 27-0. And underneath every second of it, quietly grinding down the best run defense in the league, Jim Brown carries the ball 27 times for 114 yards. A performance forceful enough that Baltimore has to keep extra men in the box all night, tearing open exactly the throwing lanes Ryan needed. Final score, Cleveland 27, Baltimore nothing. Brown alone nearly matched by himself the per-game rushing average the Colts defense had allowed all season long, 128 yards a game against a unit that had been that stingy all year. Against the favorites, in the only championship he ever won. So which version of Jim Brown is real? The one who vanished in the postseason, or the one who forced the best defense in football to build its entire game around him and still walked out of that stadium humiliated? Both happened. Both are true. That's the part of Jim Brown's legend nobody gets to simplify. Too powerful for his time. Here's where this gets uncomfortable in a different direction. Critics use the size of Brown's opponents against him. Smaller, slower men trying to bring down something they'd never trained to stop. Fine. But Brown's own size wasn't handed to him by 1957. At 6'2", 232 pounds, with legitimate sprinter's speed, he was the physical anomaly a decade like that could not manufacture twice. He didn't dominate because every athlete around him looked like Jim Brown. He dominated because almost none of them did, and there was nothing anyone could do about it.
Thought he was going to be a great back. It turns out that he's the greatest running back of all time.
Nobody discounts a modern receiver for outrunning smaller cornerbacks. Nobody discounts Derrick Henry for being bigger and faster than the safeties trying to arm tackle him. And Henry plays in a league with better nutrition, professional strength staffs, and defensive backs built like 1960s linebackers. So say it plainly. If Derrick Henry in 2026 is unfair to defend, Jim Brown in 1958 wasn't a product of weak competition. He was the original Derrick Henry problem, 6 decades before the league had a name for it, or the science to build a defender who could stop it. That's the reversal. The exact argument that opened this video as an accusation just quietly became the strongest evidence for the defense. The retirement escape. One more fight, and it's the one his fans will least want to watch. 1965 was not a decline season. It was arguably his most complete. 1,544 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns, 5.3 yards a carry, trailing only the absurd 6.4 he'd posted 2 years earlier. Still the best mark any back has ever managed for a full season.
By 29 years old, you essentially had every meaningful offensive record for a running back. You had won the league rushing titles 8 of 9 years. You had an MVP. You had a championship. Summer of 1966, when you went off to Europe to film The Dirty Dozen, did you expect to return to professional football?
No. My deal was with Art that I was retired. But if they really needed me, and I would consider coming back. But basically, I was finished.
His third MVP. Cleveland made it back to the championship game and lost to Green Bay 23-12. Brown held to 50 yards on 12 carries in the last snap he'd ever take as a professional football player. Then came the summer of 1966. Brown was in London on the set of The Dirty Dozen, and the film ran behind schedule. Back in Cleveland, owner Art Modell first threatened him with a $100 fine for every day he reported late. When that deadline kept slipping, Modell escalated in public. No veteran would be allowed to report late to camp, Brown included, or he'd be suspended without pay.
I'm surprised you'd ask me a question like that. I left when I was 29 years old. Okay? Championship, world championship in 1964. MVP,
Cleveland hasn't won anything since, by the way.
MVP of the league when I left.
On top, for sure.
And going to London to work with Raquel Welch.
Skip and I discussed that in the meeting this morning.
100 rifles, right?
That's right.
Yeah, hey, that's pretty good work if you can get it.
MVP at 29 years old, leaving, you leave your legacy intact.
Yeah.
They can't discuss it. It's what it is. You didn't hang around too long. There's no pity, no sympathy, no nothing. Most of our great heroes stay around too long.
This wasn't a polite disagreement. This was an ultimatum from a man who thought he was talking to an employee, aimed at a player who had never once, in 9 years, given the Browns a reason to doubt him. Brown wrote back. Buried in that letter was a single line that said everything, that his manhood mattered to him exactly as much as Modell's mattered to Modell. He closed by saying the decision wasn't just about himself or even his family. It was, in his own words, about his race. The night before the world found out, Brown didn't call a reporter and he didn't call Modell. He picked up a phone in London and called his teammate John Wooten back in his dorm room at training camp in Ohio. Wooten would say for the rest of his life that the voice on the other end was weary but steady, Brown asking him quietly to tell the rest of the locker room himself so they wouldn't have to hear it first from a headline. The next morning, July 14, 1966, Jim Brown sat down in a director's chair in front of an actual Army tank on a film set, still in his military fatigues, and read a single page to the gathered press. His intention, he said, had been to play the 1966 season, but circumstances made that impossible. 30 years old, still the best running back alive, still the league's active rushing leader. Gone, on his own terms, before anyone else could take that decision away from him. Did he leave at the perfect moment, or did leaving at the perfect moment make him impossible to fully judge? Walter Payton played long enough for the world to watch him age. Brown never gave football that footage because football had already stopped being the biggest fight in his life. Less than a year after that press conference in London, Brown was standing in a room in Cleveland with Bill Russell, a young Lou Alcindor, and future Mayor Carl Stokes, organizing the Cleveland Summit to publicly back Muhammad Ali's refusal to be drafted into Vietnam. He went on to found the Black Economic Union, backing hundreds of black-owned businesses. He didn't walk away because the game had finally caught him. He walked away because he'd already found something he refused to let a training camp deadline decide for him.
Jim Brown is bigger than life. A fierce competitor for justice as he was on the field for excellence.
Retiring early doesn't shrink what his peak actually was, but it does mean his legend was never forced to survive the slow public ending almost every other great player in this sport eventually has to live through. The verdict. 3 charges, 3 verdicts. No easy answers. Jim Brown dominated an inferior era, partially true and still incomplete. His world was less developed than today's NFL, and he tore through it at a level nobody since has matched. Jim Brown wasn't as dominant in the postseason, true, and it's the real weakness, not the era. 4 games, roughly 60 yards a game, 1 touchdown, an 8-yard afternoon in the snow that nearly buried his story before it ever peaked, while Davis, Harris, and Smith all rose when the lights got brighter. Real evidence against an untouchable GOAT claim, but not a conviction, not with 114 yards on 27 carries against the league's best defense sitting right next to it, in the only championship he ever actually won. Retiring early protected his legend, true, but only after he'd already earned every inch of it, and only because he had somewhere bigger to be. Jim Brown. Was the era argument really fair? Yes. Smaller defenders, a smaller league, a sport before modern training changed everything. Those facts are real, and they matter. But every other running back had access to that exact same era, and nobody else walked away with 8 rushing titles in 9 seasons, or a career average over 100 yards a game. But the legend isn't flawless. His postseason production was startlingly ordinary by his own impossible standard, next to 3 legends who got sharper under the same kind of pressure. His championship resume is thinner than most fans want to admit. So was the era argument fair? Yes. Was it ever enough to explain Jim Brown? Not even close. Remember the man getting up slowly, on his own terms, after every hit anyone was ever allowed to land on him. He never needed the record book to tell his story for him. He doesn't have to prove he'd dominate a game that didn't exist yet. He only has to prove he dominated the one he was actually given. For 9 seasons, the NFL threw everything it had at him. It wasn't enough. If you want the next verdict, Gale Sayers, Earl Campbell, or the Derrick Henry comparison we just cracked open, drop it below, hit subscribe, and don't miss the next case file. Because on this channel, the era argument was fair. Treating it as a final verdict never is. End Zone Exposed is where the truth always scores.